Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 27 in our series for 2024, and today's date is Friday, August the 2nd. First, I'll be talking to Fred Thiele, the Chief Information Security Officer at Interactive. We'll discuss how businesses can mitigate risks associated with AI. And I'll talk to Rabobank economist Michael Every about why the Chinese Communist Party Third Plenum told us nothing about China's economy and how it can be fixed. But first, let's talk to Fred Thiele.
Well, Fred, what are the risks with AI that business should take into account?
Look, I think with anything else in any kind of new technology, AI is one of those things that you do need to consider when it does come to risk. And I think a few of the risks to consider with AI are one, where your data is actually going. So AI requires data like anything else. So where is that data stored? How is it stored? Which geographical location is it stored, for instance? You have to take into account a lot of your regulatory obligations when it comes to data and understanding where that data lives. So I guess understanding where your data goes is first and foremost. The second one is with AI, especially the AI that we have now, commonly called generative AI, it's very good at finding information. So it will go out and find the information that you have access to. And that's good in that you want to find data and the AI wants to find data for you, but it can be dangerous because it can uncover things that you may find that you didn't mean to have access to that you actually do have access to. So for example, if you have an AI out there in your corporate environment and you accidentally have access to the CEO's salary and compensation package and you're not meant to have that and you go searching for salary information through the AI, it might turn up information that you're not supposed to have access to. So understanding who has access to what is very, very important when it comes to AI, and especially the generative AI that we have today.
So ethics and compliance are pretty important.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, as technology grows and proliferates, the ethics and compliance piece is absolutely important. I think we'll see some laws and regulatory compliance fire up around that and become more advanced in the AI space because of that.
So you can actually see governments bring in laws to control that.
I think like any other technology or any other, new thing that's out there, I think, sometimes regulation takes a little while to catch up and you have to understand exactly what those risks are, like you asked before you can actually regulate it.
But one of the issues that occurs to me while we're talking is about privacy. AI can actually move into people's lives that we don't know, that we don't realize.
Oh, I guess you could say the same thing about the internet technology as well, right? I mean, you look at social media and you're out there in social media, or you've got a Facebook account, search engines like Google can find out a lot of information about yourself because the internet has access to those things. Yeah.
But the difference is with a Facebook account, one assumes people put information about themselves with their own consent, and AI could have a way of finding out information about you that you don't want others to know about.
True. It kind of goes back to the previous point, though, about making sure that AI has access to the data that you intend it to have access for, right? What would be an example, I guess, not to turn the interview around, but what would be an example of what you're thinking there?
Oh, well, something, say, about payments or something about a person receiving a certain amount of money from government or pension or something like that, or disability pension or whatever, for example.
Yeah, for example, right. And I guess for AI to get a hold of that data, it would need to have access to it to begin with, right? So you could say that by default that data should be made private, should be held with the government agency or whoever has access to that private data. And if it got out by some nefarious means, say a data dump or something like that through a data breach, AI might get access to it the same way Google might get access to something, right?
Right. But could companies that give AI accidentally access to things like spreadsheets, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a risk in even before AI. That's a risk with just generally managing data. So when you talk about AI, I think data governance becomes a huge topic for exactly that reason. Is the data that you're giving the AI clean and managed well? Do people have the right access? Does the AI have the right access to that data? for instance.
How well do companies manage these sorts of issues?
Generally speaking, I think data governance and data management is still difficult. It's a discipline within cybersecurity, and we've been struggling with cybersecurity as companies for some time because it's a difficult topic. But I think as we go more down the AI path and we want to do more with our data and help people in our enterprises find out more about our data and give the AI more access to data, it's just going to be even more important. And I think this is where you'll see a lot more regulation come in around data. You've seen it with the Privacy Act in Australia. You've seen it with some incident response notification mandates in different regulations. And I think you're probably going to see it more as AI gets access to more data and companies start using AI across their data sets.
So can you see the Privacy Act being changed to accommodate this?
I think there was just a recent update to accommodate changes. So the government's pretty good about regularly updating. So I'd say absolutely, as more use cases for AI come out, the more that we understand how to use it better in our enterprises, I think those will present themselves. Some of those use cases could potentially mandate additional regulation or additional updates to the Privacy Act.
One of the big issues for companies is they could find themselves in court defending themselves over, say, accidentally releasing something or accidentally finding something or whatever.
In terms of they find something with their AI that they shouldn't have access to, and
yeah, something like that, or that they release something accidentally or whatever, something like that.
I mean, you see it today. Even again, I hate going back to, well, you see it already today, but I don't think we're really dealing with anything too new there, right? Because you see it today with somebody who accidentally sends a proposal to the wrong email address, or somebody that accidentally sends the wrong MRI record or some kind of health record to the wrong email address. So that in itself is a compromise of data, right? You're sending somebody sensitive information that they shouldn't have access to. So I think you see very similar types of things today without AI. So I think AI may find that data easier. You may have access, more ready access, or easier to find that you have access to that data. Yeah.
So basically, the issues with data are there pre-AI.
Absolutely. Yep. I think so. I think AI provides people a nice way. The AI that we have today. So AI is not a new concept, right? It goes back to the 60s and sort of that type of thing. And we're continuing to build upon it. But the generative AI that we have now, the ChatGPTs of the world, the Microsoft Copilots, these types of things where you can interact with them like a human, they're very good at deciphering language and understanding what you want to do. So they're essentially, a search engine that you can type natural language into and get the response back in natural language. So it's the next iteration of a search engine, essentially, right? It's more complicated than that, but to boil it down, the underlying data, we still have issues with that, just like we do today.
Where do you see AI heading over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think you're going to start seeing more things like better. The AI we have today, the generative AI, is very good at understanding language and pulling apart language and finding out what you want to do with that language. And we'll continue to see that get better. Although if you've played with any of the AI that's out there today, the ChatGPTs of the world or the Copilots and these types of things, you already know that it's pretty good. The image generation is getting much, much better. So I think we're going to see a lot of advancements around image generation, and then also starting to showcase a lot of video generation. So generating video that is nearly photorealistic. There's still some tweaks, but I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see massive changes in that space, to the point where possibly movies can be generated with a prompt to an AI.
Right. Okay. Which would completely change movies. It would completely change advertising, wouldn't it?
Very, very well could. I think we're already seeing a bit of that. I mean, you can go out and generate a couple of images and use that as a showcase, if you will, for a new marketing glossy or a new product you want to release. You think about ethics and compliance. You start thinking about, well, who owns the copyright to that image that was just generated by AI, and how did the royalties or whatever get allocated for those images? Is it royalty free? Is it not? So I think you're going to see a lot of these kind of things that come up. And I'm no lawyer, but I've definitely got some lawyer friends that have been asking these types of questions.
So there'll be a lot of work for lawyers.
I reckon.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, so like Fred, any other new technology that's, I won't say unregulated, but needs to be around for a while to understand where the regulation needs to be.
Well, Fred, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leon. Appreciate it.
And now let's talk to Rabobank economist Michael Every.
Well, Michael, the Chinese Communist Party entered its third plenum, and the 5,000 communique basically said nothing. What was your view about that?
Total lack of surprise. If you actually read the text translated from Chinese into English, it's a very special kind of text. I mean, it's very Chinese and it's very Marxist at the same time. I genuinely recommend people who are following China to do just that. It's not hard to find the communique, and it's not hard to click Google Translate or whatever translate function you want to use. You just read that and you think, okay, that's what analysts outside China and inside China, for that matter, have to read to try and understand about what's going to happen going forward. And you think that we put spin and color on things in our Western economic and political communiques. You think we have jargon, or that we try and talk around issues. Goodness me, it's 5,000 words at least, in which, as you said, it's said very, very little. But what we can see, speaking today, is that several things have since emerged, which I think are important. The first one, very directly from a financial market perspective, is that a key element in the text that had been rumored that might be taken out was a previous decision made in previous third plenums to say that the market has a decisive role in allocating production. Now, there were rumors that was going to be taken out, which would have been a complete reversal, step by step, back towards proper communism. That didn't happen. So that's good from a Western perspective. The second thing is, this morning we've seen the PBOC cut interest rates. Now, only by 10 basis points, but they don't cut interest rates that often. And it's a very clear signal to those of us who follow lines on screens closely that there is more policy easing coming through, at least on the monetary side. There are also suggestions you may get a little fiscal stimulus, particularly in one key form, which is this: local governments in China, which is the equivalent of your state governments in Australia, have debt up to their eyeballs, and they look like Greece at the peak of the Greece crisis from a previous decade on steroids. The central government has now said they're going to try and reform the tax system to transfer more money to them. The problem is the central government doesn't have any money either. So it's one thing to say we'll help bail these guys out, which is necessary, but it's another thing to work out where the money is going to come from to do that. So at least they recognize changes need to be made, even if there's no money in the pot to do it. And then the last one, and I think this is also very significant, and it speaks to one of the reasons why there's no money in the pot, something that I've discussed with you many times over the recent years, which is the property sector. And the clear message there is, yes, at the margin, there are going to be tweaks to the very tight regulations they have to try and cajole elements of the market to come back to a little bit of life, because it's comatose. It's completely comatose. But much more importantly, they want low house prices, not high. So it's kind of hard to get the market to come back when you don't want house prices to go up. And they want affordable housing for working class people. And a lot of that is going to be for rent. Now, that used to be called social housing. And once upon a time in the West, we used to do that as well. I'm sure you remember when we did. I do. So China is effectively sending the message that one of the ways in which it's going to address the myriad of problems that it's got is to increase the role of the state even more in the housing sector. And I actually think, from an objective perspective, that could be one of the doses of medicine that the economy does need.
Certainly the cutting of interest rates addresses a key problem with the Chinese economy, because consumers aren't spending anything.
And what they won't do, no matter how low interest rates go. We've played that silly game in the West for years. I mean, in Australia, you had rates at 0.1 as well recently. It didn't make any difference. People spend what they want to spend or don't. If you cut interest rates, all it does is encourage people to borrow. It doesn't help people earn anymore. And no one's going to be earning anymore when interest rates go down, because it's an indication of economic slowdown and weakness rather than an indication of economic strength and vitality. So the interest rates mean you're likely to get a weaker renminbi. And I think that's quite significant. I think you're going to see weaker fixing for the renminbi going forward. And what they're doing there effectively is also trying to front run anything we see from Western central banks in terms of cutting, which means that, yes, for now at least, you're likely to get downward pressure on the Chinese currency. And that will be done to try and export more. So it looks to me as if the game plan, such as they have one, and trust me, it's really hard to gain your way out of this with the mess they've created, is to export their way out, which isn't possible. To try and reshuffle the limited set of cards they have fiscally, which is not going to achieve anything, and to try and make people better off by reducing the cost of housing and making it cheaper to rent, which I think fundamentally is an incredibly important reform, which every Western economy should be looking at as well.
I was a bit gobsmacked by some of the wording on it, where they talk about, my reading of it from Google Translate, I know, is comprehensively deepening reforms, and saying the future will be critical for comprehensively advancing Chinese-style modernisation. And I read that and I thought, what the hell does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's a Rorschach picture. And whenever you read a Chinese text, it always is. And I've said to you before, and I'll say to listeners again, in order to read that and interpret it, there's an enormous degree of what we used to call Kremlinology involved, like trying to understand the mysteries of what are going on, in the CCP's Politburo circling around Xi Jinping. And also to genuinely understand the almost medieval Latin liturgy that you get when you're looking at Communist Party doctrine and mantra. Everything's constantly having to refer back to Marx and Lenin and Mao and Xi, and constantly rotating around all these truisms that have to be repeated over and over again, even if what you're saying then runs completely counter to them, because you're never allowed to actually countermand something that's already been put down as holy writ. So it's basically like the ideology grows like a coral reef. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it may grow to the left and eventually then swing around and grow to the right, but it can never just grow to the right or to the left. It has to do it slowly. So you get very, very dense, layered, confusing text, which you have to understand the background of before you read it. And the one you're referring to there, I agree, doesn't mean anything in isolation. You have to look at it in the totality of understanding that they know they're in a real pickle, and they are, but they're refusing to embrace what would be the Western policy prescription of just, okay, so just cut interest rates, bail everybody out, which never used to be our prescription, but is now. And or privatize everything, which is never going to be on the cards. So they're trying to look at the limited toolkit they've got and work out how they can then build a layer of policy on top of what they've done to gradually move in a direction that they think will be efficacious. But it's a whole different ball game to what we're used to looking at in the West.
Totally. And what you call criminology. I was fascinated by the shift in personnel at the CCP.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you do see important faces, quote unquote, assume different positions, but it's still all about Xi Jinping. That's all it really comes down to. I don't see any sign particularly that it's less about Xi Jinping today than it was a couple of weeks ago. And so it's still critically important to understand what his view of the world is. And again, I repeat, as I've said to you before, very, very bluntly, and to listeners before, Xi Jinping openly says, and everyone who knows anything of him knows it's true, that he is a genuine dyed-in-the-wool Marxist. So anyone who's trying to understand his thought or understand what his economic philosophy will be going forward, damn well better read some Marx and some Lenin and some Mao, as well as some Xi. And if they haven't, I simply don't understand what ground they're doing their job on. Because, how could you possibly interpret what someone's thinking if you don't understand how they think?
The other thing about China's economy at the moment is that they would have been preparing, at least until today, the prospect of dealing with Donald Trump as president.
Well, I think from their perspective, whichever way the US election was going to go, and of course it's a much wilder card this morning after the news we've had about President Biden dropping out of the race, they knew that they were in for a rough ride because Biden had been genuinely tightening the screws, 2 steps forward, 1 step back on China. And Trump, on one hand, of course, was saying China, 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 as he always does. And, we're going to put a 100% tariff on Chinese goods. But at the same time, as a deal maker, and was probably likely to try and say to Beijing, right, okay, how can we make this work for both of us? Well, you let me rise and you fall a little bit. So I don't think China believes for a moment that there is a candidate out there on the spectrum of realistic possibilities now who's going to be pro-China. That ship has sailed. And the only question is, can they at least find one who might manage to not sink the ship for the next, 4 years, or can they keep it sailing? That's all it really comes down to. I don't think there are any illusions there that we can go back to where we were.
Well, the issue is, Democrats were railing on about Trump's tariffs, but they were doing exactly the same.
They were. I mean, the key difference there is that the Democrats were trying to choose key sectors and saying, okay, we want this particular industry to be made in America for national security reasons. Trump is more broadly saying, I don't want anything made in America I want everything made in America that isn't, absolutely useless to us. So as much as possible, I want everything made in America. And to be blunt, you can make very credible cases for both. You can say, well, let's do this with a scalpel and say we want to keep this industry and that industry and this industry, but we don't care about the rest. That will always create tensions with China because, of course, everyone's going to cherry pick. Everyone wants the juicy, high value-added, high technology, sexy areas, which is, of course, what China wants too. And Trump, more generally, by saying we want just about everything, well, that's better for blue-collar American workers, obviously. It's also the policy that's more likely to build up a broader industrial base which could, if push came to shove, pivot to producing military goods. Whereas if you only have key sectors, maybe you can't scale up rapidly, as we saw in World War I and World War II. So you can make a case for either. You can't make a case for either as being good for China.
Right, okay. So what conclusion can we draw about the Chinese economy from all of this?
Well, I don't think you're going to see many changes relative to where we have been. Growth is going to continue around the levels that it has been. Where you could potentially see changes, they will be increasingly radical from a Western perspective. And yet, again, to repeat something I've said to you very bluntly, I genuinely think all of us, and especially Australia, need to be paying attention to it, because I have a sneaking suspicion that radical and crazy, quote unquote, as some of it will seem, it could work. Whereas what we're doing in the West blatantly doesn't.
Indeed. Okay, well, Michael, it's been great talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So what's happening in the news? Well, the economics of hosting the Olympics, like those we're seeing now in Paris, are challenging. 10 of the 13 summer games until 2016 had resulted in losses, and all of them ran over budget. Recent research by Alexander Boutier and Brent Flyberg at Oxford University estimates that each Olympiad overshoots its original budget by an average of 195%. In Paris, the figure is projected to be 115%. As the Olympics have grown, they have attracted more media interest and larger pots of sponsorship money. At present, the IOC still retains the bulk of the Games' earnings from broadcasters and sponsors. Broadcast revenues rose from $2.2 billion in the 1993-96 cycle to $4.5 billion in 2017-21 at 2021 prices, while top-tier sponsorship jumped from $480 million to $2.3 billion over the same period. Major sponsors of the Paris Games include LVMH, the French luxury empire, but costs have grown even faster than sponsorship had. In 1924, the Paris Games cost around $9 million in 2022 prices. This time, the estimated cost is around $9 billion. The Parisian Organising Committee, however, will almost certainly need to stump up more because of overruns. The private sector will foot most of the total bill through the IOC, partner firms, tickets, licensing and more. All this hardened public opinion and led to International Olympic Committee changes. The IOC's reforms are a welcome start, but more could be done in future to make the Games easier to host. One idea is to spread the Olympics out. Different cities in different countries could host different events. For economists, this is the surest way to cut costs. More places spending on events would mean a smaller bill for each. And a multi-city model could also help assuage local concerns by reducing the pressure on any single host. And major Democratic donors are already flocking to Kamala Harris, and they say the main reason is straightforward. She's not Joe Biden. Her presidential campaign raised more than $200 million in its first week, and the Democratic super PAC Future Forward said it had received US $150 million in commitments after Biden bowed out. The wave of big dollar donors, which is defying predictions that the Vice President would not be able to appeal to the party's fundraising class, has been particularly noticeable because of some donors' previous aversion to giving to a president they saw as a doomed candidate. Donors say that with Harris assuming Biden's spot at the top of the ticket, they're now more willing to support a Democratic presidential candidate again. Some were also motivated by their desire to beat GOP nominee Donald Trump. It's still early days, but so far the stream of money has been so strong that one donor advisor has even cautioned some donors to slow down until the dynamics of the race make it clearer where money is most needed. Venture capital Bradley Tusk had decided not to donate significantly to Biden's re-election campaign, but with Harris as a Democratic candidate, he said he planned to give at least $100,000 to back her. With Biden at the top of the ticket, he reasoned the funding would not have paid off, but Harris's chances were markedly better than Biden's, and unlike the president, Harris wasn't falling asleep or giving crazy answers. I understand why people might grumble, and she might not be their first choice, Tusk said, but in reality it comes down to this, which is, do you want Trump back or not? And if the answer is no, there's now a candidate that is viable. And while Harris's identity as a black and South Asian woman may have at one time caused doubts among that traditional donor base, her candidacy also brings in money from new corners of the party. Among South Asian donors, enthusiasm for Harris's rise to the top of the ticket has been off the charts, said Raj Goyal, a former Kansas state representative who bundled for Barack Obama's 2012 campaign and co-founded Indian American Impact, a voter mobilization non-profit. I think people have tried for years to use her biracial identity and a multi-ethnic background as a criticism, whereas I think many of us view it as a strength, Goyle said. Biotech venture capital Neil Exeter conceded that Harris probably would not have been his first choice to lead the ticket. Nobody knows whether she'll be a good candidate for the next 100 days or not, he said. Still, if need be, he would give money to support the ticket because at this point, he said, Democrats do not have a choice. I wouldn't be giving her money because of who she is. It's rather, I'm giving money because I really don't want Trump to be president, he said. An Australian annual inflation rate lifted to 3.8% in the year to June, from 3.6% previously, to land broadly in line with expectations ahead of the next interest rate meeting. The Australian Bureau of Statistics said it was the first annual increase in the Consumer Price Index since December 2022. On a quarterly basis, inflation rose 1% in the 3 months ended June, the same as in the March quarter, and was in line with economists' expectations. The all-important data release sets the scene for the Reserve Bank of Australia's interest rate meeting next week, amid concerns it could be enough to trigger another interest rate hike. Yet, the annual trim mean, the central bank's preferred measure of underlying inflation, undershot expectations to come in at 3.9%, down from 4% in March. And if you think the inflation figures are bad news, then wait for this. Regional towns feel they will lose services, tourists and workers if Rex Airlines is grounded, as the nation's third biggest airline went into voluntary administration on Tuesday night. Ernst & Young were brought as administrators of parent group Regional Express Holdings late on Tuesday night, after a Rex trading halt on Monday shook the aviation sector. Regional flights will still operate, but Rex's capital city flights will be cancelled, and Virgin has offered to cover flights for those passengers affected. Virgin Australia has made an offer for Rex customers with an existing ticket on a flight cancelled due to the administration process the opportunity to transfer their ticket free of charge to the 13 overlapping Virgin Australia services, EY said in a statement late on Tuesday. Rex and Virgin Australia are also exploring opportunities to support regional customers, which include Virgin Australia selling Rex's regional services through code share or interline arrangements and making Velocity frequent flyer benefits available to Rex's regional customers. The airline flies dozens of routes across the continent that are not serviced by other carriers, piggybacking freight onto passenger flights and delivering an essential service to towns scattered throughout outback Australia. ASX-listed Rex was put into a trading halt until Wednesday amid concerns the airline was on the brink of collapse after its costly expansion into major city routes. The board met on Tuesday and agreed to go into administration. Customers were still able to book flights on Rex services for regional destinations on Tuesday, but community leaders were anxious about what the carrier's future would hold. Sean Ratnedge, Mayor of Murwah Shire in southwestern Queensland, said Rex played a vital role in providing connectivity with the rest of the country. About 12 Rex flights touch down in Charleville every week on a milk run from Brisbane to Birdsville, bringing locals returning from a trip to the city, workers, government agents, tourists, mail and supplies. Many of the passengers rely on the airline, which operates subsidised trips in partnership with the Queensland Government, to take them to medical appointments in Brisbane or Toowoomba. Like many councils in Western Queensland, Murwah Shire has a partnership with Rex to provide cheaper fares for residents and guarantee regular flights. The council itself relies on the airline to bring in accountants and other key workers who are not based in Charleville. As far as our rural communities go, this air contract to bring people to communities is our lifeblood, Mr. Ratnedge said. It offers us opportunities not only for work, but medical transport and things like that. It is a vital service. It's a similar story in the central West Australian town of Carnarvon, 900 kilometres north of Perth, where a 9-hour drive can be shortened to a flight of 1 hour and 45 minutes. Marone Beard, who represents the electoral district of North West Central for the Liberal Party in the Western Australian Parliament, said her office had been inundated with calls from community members worried about the fate of the airline. It's critical, absolutely critical for lots of reasons, Ms. Beard said. With limited health services locally, people travel all the time for health, business meetings and also for family and socialising. Not everyone is in a state where they can travel by car. Ms. Beard said Rex's troubles had highlighted vulnerabilities in regional areas that have been subjected to years of diminishing access to important services, including healthcare. Regional health services have been depleted, and that has exacerbated the need for air services, she said. It's connectivity. It's a necessity in the regions. It affects future economic development as well. Without air services, it makes it hard to bring new people and businesses to the area. Tourism towns around Shark Bay are also reliant on Rex services to carry visitors, while agricultural businesses around Carnarvon need the flights to bring in agronomists, valuers and other specialist workers not based in the region. Rex flights also deliver boarding students to and from school in the south. Rex flights are a mainstay of Mornington Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria, where planes arrive daily from Cairns and Mount Isa. They're so popular that locals book travel weeks in advance to make sure they get a seat. Aside from chartering a private boat or plane, the Rex flights are the only way on or off the island, which is home to about 1,100 people, and services are regularly booked out. Doctors, nurses, school teachers, police officers, government agents and construction workers rely on Rex flights to get to and from the island. Transport Minister Catherine King told the ABC, "We think Rex is a pretty important part of the Australian aviation industry and stand ready to work with them to see whether there's any assistance or anything the government needs to do. We think very clearly it's important to keep regional aviation and regional connectivity." Starting out as a purely regional airline, Rex expanded into domestic services in competition with Qantas, Virgin and Jetstar during the COVID pandemic, when at least 9 Boeing 737s. The expansion has been blamed for the company's decline. Rex's most recent results for the 6 months to December 2023 showed its regular public transport operations had lost more than $25 million or almost $1 million a week. And Australia's top companies face lower profits this earnings season, which starts this week and runs until August the 30th, as a cocktail of high interest rates, elevated costs and economic uncertainty puts the brakes on strong growth. Company results for the 2024 financial year are expected to show further signs of household stress, particularly in the soft fourth quarter, with at-home consumption outperforming out-of-home. Market forecasts are for an average profit fall of 4% among ASX companies over the 12 months to June 30 compared to the previous period. Analysis from stockbroker Morgans shows forecast earnings per share growth for the financial year has slid to 6% from previous expectation of 7%, while it expects the S&P ASX 200 will return to steady earnings growth of 5.8% in FY25 and 7.8% for EPS. Junbei Liu, lead portfolio manager at Tribeca's Alpha Plus fund, said this coming reporting season would be one of the softer reporting seasons in recent times. Company revenue will be under more pressure and margins will continue to move lower given the slowing economic activity and higher inflation, she said. And new Workplace Relations Minister Murray Watt has predicted it will take years for the CFMEU to fully reform itself, saying he was shocked and disturbed at the alleged widespread infiltration of the union by organised crime. Senator Watt said he was briefed by his department about the looming application by the Fair Work Commissioner Murray Furlong to place a number of the CFMEU's construction divisions into administration. If a union indicated it would oppose or seek to frustrate the application, he reiterated the government would be prepared to introduce legislation to ensure the administration proceeded. Senator Watt said it was likely Mr Furlong would seek administration for a set period of time, and if legislation was required, one of the issues to be considered by the government would also be the length of the administration period. I think it's likely to take years to fully reform the CFMEU and make sure it's delivering on its promise to represent its members, he said. And the chief executives of Australia's biggest healthcare companies have sat down with the Albanese government to report on the crisis facing the country's private hospitals. The diagnosis was grim. Hospital operators say the $22 billion sector is at a crunch point. Soaring costs and wages and tanking patient numbers since the COVID-19 pandemic mean many of the country's 650 private hospitals are losing money. Maternity and mental health services are the hardest hit due to high specialist fees and out-of-pocket costs. More closures are looming. However, the hospital operators are at loggerheads with health insurers who fund the system and who believe hospitals need an overhaul to make them more efficient. Health Minister Mark Butler has launched a review of the sector with findings due next month. He has asked players to submit detailed financials as part of the inquiry, which is designed to identify pain points and work out whether reform is needed. Butler's people said reports about the sustainability of some private hospitals are concerning, particularly those in regional areas and where they play an important role in the local community. The probe has inflamed tensions between hospital operators who want government help to keep facilities open and health insurers who fear their record profits make them an easy target. The insurers also fear they could be forced to increase their funding for hospitals. This is playing out publicly with St Vincent's, the country's largest non-profit hospital group, threatening to walk away from its contract with health insurer NIB. The government's biggest fear is private hospital closures will heap pressure on an already overburdened public system. There are also implications for investors, with billions of dollars invested in both publicly listed health providers, including Ramsay Health Care, and private equity-backed Healthscope, which has been in negotiation with its lenders to restructure $1.6 billion in debt for months. The pandemic was a turning point for private hospitals around the world as patients stayed home and surgery was postponed. A post-pandemic surge in costs, including wages, higher interest rates and a switch by patients to day surgery, in-home care and online consultations has exacerbated losses. Industry players point to a 28.4% pay rise for Victorian nurses over 4 years approved in June as an example of the outrageous cost increases facing the sector. At the same time, insurers are enjoying a renaissance after years of losses. The money they paid in claims sank during the pandemic, and a record number of Australians took on private insurance, although there are early signs numbers could drop off due to cost of living pressures. However, claims and counterclaims made by vested interests are clouding the process. There are the operators themselves, who range from listed companies to private equity and church-backed not-for-profits. Insurers, state governments, unions and powerful interest groups representing GPs, surgeons and others also have a say. Many of those who briefed the Health Department Secretary Blair Comley at meetings this week are pessimistic about finding a cure. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Paul Koopmans, the Australian-New Zealand Vice President of WorldPlay, on the growth of digital wallets, which are projected to grow by 45% in Australia of all e-commerce transactions by 2027 as cash and card use declines. The use of digital wallets at point of sale or POS terminals is projected to double from 15% in 2023 to 30% of the POS market size of $789 billion in 2027. And I'll talk to AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver about the latest inflation figures. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you can catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. And if you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Also, in my copious spare time, I have a copywriting business. If anyone needs newsletters, blogs, articles or advertorial, email me. Wishing you all a safe and healthy week and looking forward to bring you Talking Business next week.